Hello, and thank you for joining us. I'm Chris Paterna, Partner and Chief Revenue Officer here at Compass. And this is Need to Know, our webisode series where we get to the latest industry news, cut through the noise, and get to the good stuff. Today, I'm joined by Seth Larner, Partner and Chief Executive Officer here at Compass. Welcome, Seth. Thanks again for joining us. Today, we're going to be talking about the ABCs of pooled employer plans. How they work, what they are, how they differ from other types of plans. We'll talk about some of the pros and cons and what the industry wants and where it may be going in our opinion. So quite a bit to get to. We're going to talk about a lot of acronyms, a lot of slang terminology here, but let's get into it. And we want to take 1 second here and talk about first, what is a pooled employer plan? And Seth, I'll turn it over to you if you can kind of break down the definition if you don't mind.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. So definition of pooled employer plan is really what it is an aggregate of plans coming together to get group pricing. The nice thing about pooled employer plans is you may have 15 companies that can reach a different type of investment breakpoint to help with overall costs. One thing to be aware of is we're going to be tossing a lot of different acronyms out here. And I'd like to even say there isn't really a standardization of acronyms. Sometimes there are and they're not, but we have group plan solutions, we have GOPS, group of plans, we have MEAPS, we have PEPs, MEPs, and there's some others too. Those are the main ones we have, but just as an FYI, there's a lot of different acronyms that go around with these.
And we'll get to those in just a second, but just as a quick reminder as we get into the pros and cons here, Compass offers all these types of plans, including the traditional single employer plan. So it's really what's going to be the best fit for you and your employees. But let's talk about some of the pros and cons here as we move into our next section. One of the biggest pros for these types of arrangements is full fiduciary coverage. Most of these plans come with a full 338 investment fiduciary, full 316 investment fiduciary, and when you get into the PEP world, you also have a PPP, which also provides another level of fiduciary protection. So that can really help you out. Second piece is when you have all these fiduciary protections, it also provides you another level of administrative support, which means things like your plan notices, filing and signing 5500s, kind of creates a nice turnkey solution for companies that need extra help managing and administering their plan each year.
Yeah. Some other things though too that these have, which are nice, has some pros, when it gets really down to is turnkey. Now turnkey can be a pro and a con, but a lot of times they fit into a box. So if you just want a simple, easy solution, these are a great model for this. Again, if you want something to customize it, it may be a con. Another thing that we have quite often with these things that we see that a lot of people like, is it's really dedicated support with some of the vendors. Because since these things are so big, they get some dedication as well too, which is a nice positive for it.
Nice. One of those other pieces, as you kind of mentioned, that could be a pro or a con, is the investment menu. So you have an independent 338 who is selecting and monitoring the investment lineup, but every adopter, so every company that joins one of these arrangements has the same investment lineup. So that could be a pro or a con. It's a nice turnkey solution, as you mentioned, Seth. So you don't have to worry about that. You don't have to have any of those emotional attachments to a specific investment. You're not playing favorites with employees that may be coming to you as the owner HR committee of your own plan. So you can kind of outsource that and have one static lineup. But it could be a con. Again, if you're looking for more customization, that would be more on the single employer. You create your own plan. You really would not use one of these type of arrangements.
Yeah, exactly. Another one that is a pro and a con is branding. So a lot of companies want their retirement plan to be branded to their name. They have, they take pride in it, they authentication in it, they want it. Some just say, hey, you know what? It could be a private equity firm. We're a PE firm. We own a bunch of companies. We want it branded as the whole organization, not just that one company. So that could be a pro in theory for a PE firm because they're branding it for all the sub-companies they own. But another company may say it's a con. So that's another thing is branding of these plans too, because it is one name that covers them all. So that's another one.
Yeah. Just kind of going down this line of walking that line between pro and con is limited customization in your plan design. It's not the case for every type of plan, but for some of these arrangements, the way the record keepers and administrators gain scale and help drive pricing down is having limited customization. So you will get some options, but the more they can keep things the same, the easier it is to manage and hopefully the lower the cost gets for everybody.
Yeah.
Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, another one too with this pro and con is pricing. I mean, pricing can be another big pro and con on these. Depending on the size of plan you are and what you are. If you are a small startup plan, you're going to get pricing levers, and this is going to be really attractive for you. If you're a small plan like that, will work. But let's say, depending on what size plan you are, and depending on what product you are using of these pooled plans, because we're going to get into those products in a second, you could be a $3 million plan with 15 people. You'll probably price better as a single employer plan than you would as in a pooled arrangement, because quite often, typically, your size plan is maybe going to offset the pricing for others. So that's something to be aware of. It's sometimes not that drastic of pricing, but something to be aware of is that your pricing, you could get really good pricing, or your pricing may be more expensive in these solutions.
Interesting. So a little bit more to dig into before you jump to one of these solutions. The last piece I'll mention is when you talk about, again, that 338 provides a nice level of fiduciary protection. But most of the time, the 338s are coming from an independent investment firm. Some are very big names, some are more smaller boutique firms, but it takes that investment monitoring and lineup selection out of the hands of your local advisor. So what's the role of your advisor going forward then? It would be mainly an educational and support kind of relationship management role. So that could be a pro or con depending on what you're looking for you and your employees.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think with this maybe makes sense to go into, since we talked to the pros and the cons, maybe it makes sense to go into some of these different types of plans, and then what size plans are for what type of company.
Sure.
So with this, there's really two main types of pool plan solutions. I'm going to be kind of very high level about this. There's what we call the GOPS, the MEPs, or the GOPS, the MEAPs, exchanges or group plan solutions. Those are typically for the small companies, and then we'll talk secondly about larger companies for the MEPs and PEPs. So to get really into the GPSs, GOPS, MEAPs, those are really what they are. Very interesting. You have a full 316 fiduciary on them, which means someone is doing the full administration and taking fiduciary liability on that administrative side. And then you'll have a 338 on, like we mentioned, which is in charge of the investments. It's a set investment lineup. So you cannot change that lineup. So if you said, I don't like that fund is staying there no matter what, okay? Unless the 338 decides not to, okay? So that's one great thing. Now the big thing with these plans is they're actually still individually designed plans, individual plans, but they're gonna have a group name. So it will say the ABC 401k plan when participants log on to the website, but behind the scenes, it's still their own individual plan. So when we file 5500s in government filing forms, we're still filing their own 5500 government form, plus they're going to have their own plan document adoption agreement as a single employer plan. The benefit with this is all these small plans are grouped together, so they get economies of scale. So it's kind of like a little bit of a hybrid with some things that we're going to talk about in a second, but it's individual plans that get group pricing. So
question for you, do these individual companies, plans, they need to be related at all? Any kind of connection?
Yeah, no relation at all. So that's one of the big key things. So that is one of the nice things is there's no relation at all. So you could have a trucking company and a law firm all in the same plan that have no correlation or relation to each other in separate parts of the country and everything else, which is really nice.
Yeah. And just to kind of fill in some gaps here, so when we say GOP, G-O-P stands for group of plans, and GPS stands for Group Plan Solution. Just a couple of the acronyms that come out, but really referring to the same type of plan. Yeah. Shifting gears, let's get into MEPs and PEPs. And I did forget to mention at the beginning that many of these solutions have actually been around 10, 15, 20 years, but really gained prominence through the Secure Act, and then through the Secure Act 2.0, we really had the proliferation of PEPs come out. So let's talk about MEPs and PEPs. So MEP stands for Multiple Employer Plan. And traditionally, this is something created for when you have a group of companies that are related. The most common examples would be associations or trade groups, or something like many clients use a professional employment organization, a PEO out there. So those types of companies, individual companies, are related, so they can pool their plans together and create one massive plan. Under that arrangement, it's one 5500, so you're kind of giving up control. You would have most of the time a 316 as well as a 338 in fiduciaries on the plan, but you're filing a single 5500 form. So if you're taking your own plan and moving into a MEP solution, that old plan is terminated and dies off all of the employees in the plan assets move into this new plan, and you file under that umbrella. Now, when we get to PEPs, pooled employer plans, it works very similar to a MEP, but you don't have to have any kind of connection or association or trade group between companies. They were designed so anybody could join this plan. The interesting thing is that they were really geared for larger plans. You can actually have one audit on the entire plan once that PEP gets to 1,000 participants in the plan. Yeah. So having that, removing that common nexus, as it's called, can create a lot of opportunities for individual companies to join these type of arrangements.
Now, Chris, you talked about the audit for the PEP and the MEP. Do they still audit the individual adopters?
Yeah, so once the PEP or a MEP enters that audit territory, so for a multiple employer plan, a MEP, it's a single plan, so once they reach 100 participants, they have to be audited. With a PEP, it's 1,000 participants, a little bit different, but again, still need to be audited. And yes, the audit community has come out and said, if we're going to be auditing it, especially the first time, everybody has to be touched. Every company is going to be required to provide census data, payroll records. In some cases, the auditors are going to ask for I-9s, employee handbooks, so on and so forth. Now, once the audit has been going on for a number of years, as that MEP or PEP gets larger, then the auditors can do some type of sampling where they take a percentage of the largest companies, but every group has to be touched at least every 3 or so years, every individual group in there. So you may have heard some things in the community here, the industry, hey, you join these plans, you never have to talk to an auditor again. Unfortunately, that's just not the case.
Yeah. And one thing that we've come across too with working with a lot of the MEPs we work with is if a small employer goes into a MEP and the MEP is audited, same thing with a PEP, and they get asked a question, they have to respond. And if they don't respond, it's a big issue and they'll be forced to leave the MEP. So that's one thing to be aware of with MEPs and PEPs in general. If a small employer goes into it, and a small employer again is less than 100 employees, goes into this and they get asked a question, they need to answer that question and respond. So sometimes what we've seen is these people adopt into it that probably should stay a single employer plan so they stay out of that audit requirement unless they're ready for that. So.
Yeah, that's a really good point. When you're working in that GOP or GPS or MEAP kind of arrangement, you're still your own plan. So you wouldn't have an audit until your own plan gets to 100, regardless of how big everybody else is. But in the MEP and PEP, they've got their own specific rules. Again, MEP is 100 participants, with the PEP is 1,000. But each of those types of plans do have procedures for a bad apple, where they would be kicked out of the plan if they don't respond.
Yep. So.
Great. Anything else to add regarding 5500, Seth? Did I miss anything?
No, I think you covered it all. The other big thing I would just mention about 5500s and the audit, I'm big on the audits because we deal with it often, is a lot of times people say, because we have a PEP that we are launching in the next week or so, and one thing people will be aware of is, you lose that audit cost. That audit cost still exists, whether the plan's paying for it or the participants, each adopting employer has to pay a little bit for it. It's still getting paid for by the plan in some way, shape, or form. And we've talked to a number of different auditors, and let me tell you, these audit costs are still very expensive. It's not like a normal audit typically costs between 15 to 20, I'd say on average, companies, depending on their complexity. These audit costs aren't being, it's $3,000 per adopter. It's pretty expensive when you really look at it, and we've really shopped it around quite a bit, and it's very fascinating. So,
yeah, I think the audit community, CPAs have been hit by inflation just like everyone else, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So that brings us to our next question, and this is, somewhat of an opinion. And what does the industry want? Where is it going? In a sense, you look at these record keepers in the industry. There's a lot of pricing pressure from clients, businesses, advisors. So everyone's working to try to squeeze this rock as hard as you can and make these plans more attractive, lower cost, better for the participants. So this is one way that the record keeping industry is jumping onto to find out ways to shrink those costs, but also increase their margins. If you look at it from a large record keeper's perspective, if they could have a single fund lineup and a single kind of service model for a large block of plans, then they can increase their margins and provide kind of one service to a whole group of plans instead of a customized solution to 1,000 individual plans.
Yeah. In addition, too, with these record keepers, what they're really looking for, too, with this is scale. We've talked to a number of them, and they want a significant number of assets in this very quickly. They want to grow very quickly, and they also don't want 1,000 of these. They just want a few. So they want to build these for the masses, just something else to be aware of. The other big thing that I would say, where I see the industry going with this is definitely going to be a part of the industry. When it comes right down to it, I'm not sure how big of it's going to be, because we've also heard a lot of people adopting into these PEPs arrangements right now, and now coming out of them because they're like, hold on, this isn't what I thought it was. The cost saving isn't what I thought. And now I have to deal with an audit, because it could be a 75 life company before they didn't have it, and now they have it. So there is some really pros and cons with this that it's kind of interesting to see. Now, with that being said, we do a lot of work in the private equity world. And the private equity people think this is the best thing since sliced bread. So there is market spaces for this that I do think will grow pretty quickly. But at the same point, there's also a lot of companies out there that say, I'm just not a fan of this. I want to keep running our own plan. So I think it'll be a piece of the market, but not as big as I think some people think it's going to be.
Yeah, some partners that we work with actually shared with us an industry survey and of a number of large record keepers that filled out the survey. Over 2/3 reported that PEPs and MEPs and GOPs and all these acronyms are going to be a significant portion of their business in the next 5 years. So it's kind of interesting where they think it's going to go.
Yeah.
The other item that I'll mention too is, there's a number of these out there, and over the past 5 years, there's hundreds of these started. Again, all the different acronyms. So if the average one of these kind of arrangements has 2 or 3 or 4 or 10 plans, is that enough as a scale? Probably not. As Seth mentioned, these plans are really designed to get to 100, 500, 1,000 different adopting employers joining in there, bringing their plan and joining into it. So there's been a number started. There'll probably be some consolidation and a few kind of big ones remaining.
Yeah. And Chris and I actually had a call with a very large record keeper yesterday, just a check-in call, normal. And we were just talking about this industry specifically. And it was interesting. They say they are limiting the number of new GOPs, MEAPs, PEPs that they're creating now, unless they do believe there's significant scale involved. So that's something else to be aware of. So if you are someone that thinks, hey, you know what, I got 20 plans, I want to create my own, record keepers may not agree to it. So just be aware of that too. They want, as Chris is saying, they want to see 100 adopters, 200 adopters. That's where they start seeing the scale and growth of these.
Nice. Yeah. Well, that kind of covers the overall topics here we want to cover. And now we get to the Q&A. And there's been a number of questions, so I'm going to kind of jump into some of these on the big board here. One of them is talking about PEPs and MEPs, so we kind of covered that briefly before. MEP, multiple employer plan with an M, is really designed for a common group of companies that are related somehow through association, trade group, PEO, et cetera. Whereas PEP, a pooled employer plan, PEP, there's no relation, there's no common nexus needed. And the PEP includes that higher level of fiduciary coverage with a PPP, the triple P on there. Yeah. Another question that's come in from the group here is, are you allowed to change from one type of plan to another? Yes. You can go from your own single employer to one of these GOPs, GPSs, exchanges, and then if you grow large enough, you can go to a PEP. If your company reduces staff, you can go back to one of those. You can go back to a simple employer. Yes, you can leave. It's not always easy. There is some work involved to get out of one of these arrangements or get into the new arrangements, but yes, you are allowed to change back and forth.
Yep. There's another question out there is, could a PEP offer a self-directed window above and beyond the 338 lineup? As a reminder, there's a set 338 lineup. In theory, yes, the PEP in theory can offer a self-directed window. With our PEP, that is going to be an option on a very specific approval basis only. One thing I will say I do notice is we don't see too much self-directed windows. The other part to be aware of, I always like to say, is if you go into that self-directed window, there is no fiduciary protection from any vendor when you go into that world. And there will sometimes typically be a limitation of how much assets can go into that realm as well too. So it is possible, but I will be honest, I very rarely see this in today.
Yeah, so. And that brings up a kind of an interesting comment about the purpose of these plans also is to simplify things. we all love to over-customize these plans and make them great, and that could be a good thing sometimes. But in general, the simpler we make plans and the more streamlined, the better it is for participants, the better it is to run your own plan. Obviously, on our side and the record keeper side, less chance for error. So something to be said for simplification nowadays.
As I always like to say, if you want to be cute, have a single employer plan. If you want to be basic, go to the PEP all day long or go to the GOP. But if you want to be cute and do this funny stuff, it's best to be single employer, stay that way. So.
There's a question out here about if your company gets purchased, how easy is it to get out of a PEP? So that really depends on what kind of purchase it was, asset or stock sale. Please check out a different webisode we did on mergers and acquisitions, because it'll really depend on if it was an asset sale or asset purchase or a stock sale or purchase. But yes, at a certain point, your plan would need to get out of there and be terminated if the company and the plan was not continuing.
To elaborate on that too, I actually just dealt with two merger acquisition situations, with a current client of ours, and they're PE backed, and both plans they had were at Paychex, and they wanted to terminate the plans they had for acquisition. And one was a single employer plan, and one was a PEP at Paychex. The single employer plan, we were able to get that done within 5 days. It was simple, it was easy. And we started the same process literally on the same day. It was pretty impressive. The PEP, they got back and said it was going to take at least 3 months to do this process. They've called numerous people, couldn't get exception, so ended up pushing out the sale of that business by 3 months because they couldn't close. Because that was a big thing with them, is they wanted that plan closed the day before acquisition, and that was coming from the attorneys. So, so something to be aware of is if you're in a PEP and you want to probably sell your business, closing out that arm can take a while. So that's just something to be aware of.
Interesting.
Yeah. One other question we got is there a 316 service today? Do they work with all payroll companies? As a high level, 316 services kind of vary. I mean, typically, when you want to be a 316 in these arrangements, you typically want someone they're really a 402A because they're going to be named in the plan document as the plan administrator. It's a pretty big role. With that being said, payroll connections really depend on the payroll provider. So yes, we at Compass, we can connect to about 70 different payroll providers with API connections. There's some we just can't connect to. They're mom and pop shops and you just can't connect with them. So that really gets down to a case-by-case basis. I will say, in working in the GOP, MEAP world, it's a good chance, but they'll definitely come because they're going to be usually typically smaller clients than that. Dealing in the PEP world, MEP world, typically there isn't a problem because they're usually working with the major payroll providers that we'd all have integrations with. So just a general rule of thumb. So.
Thanks. And then we actually have two kind of similar questions on here. Is there a pooled plan that is chosen most frequently, or what's the most popular? Is the other question kind of the same idea here? And this is a great question, actually. So the technical answer is, please look at your own plan and what's going to be the best fit for you. But right now, the most popular plan is a PEP. It's the newest. It's the hottest thing out there. A lot of people are talking about it. It's very attractive right now. So we are seeing tons of different kinds of companies going into this plan. And again, we're taking a lot of people out of the PEPs, especially smaller companies that were sold this a few years ago and really wasn't a good fit for them. So before you rush into anything, please take a look at it. There's nothing out there that is the best in the world, or there's no one size fits all. It's really going to be what you're looking for, what your company needs, what size your company is, and the makeup of your plan. So hopefully this helps a little bit. We're hitting the end of our time. We really appreciate everybody joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you on our next webisode.
Have a great day. Thank you.